Daylight fading. Tazia descended the spiral stairs in silence. Now and again she would touch 2 fingers to her lips, and then touch one of the skulls cemented into the wall. She paused at the bottom, and settled the long cloak of black feathers round her shoulders, and adjusted her dragonbone mask. They still felt a little alien to her. She realised she was stood in front of the most recent skull to be added to the ossuary, and let her hand linger gently on it for several moments before she stepped through the crude archway into the barrow proper. At one time there had been candles here, but now it was pitch black. The dim light from the stairs illuminated nothing save the darkness, which hung like a curtain around her. She waited patiently. The only sound was her breathing. In, out. In, out. After a few long minutes, a quiet, empty voice spoke from somewhere out in the dark. Vaclav, it whispered, and then fell still.
No, my lord, it is Tazia. Vaclav was my father. He passed away a year ago next month.
Ah, poor Vaclav. Such a fine steward. Such a fine emissary.
Tazia waited to see if there was more, but there was not. She let the silence lie between them for a few minutes, then respectfully spoke up. I dreamt last night that you wished me to come to you, my lord. I hope I was not mistaken.
There was silence again, and when the voice spoke again it was a little more sure. No mistake, child of Vaclav. There is something come back into the world that should not be here. It makes me restless. She said nothing, waiting attentively. The crows are circling, the voice said again after a moment. I have tasks for you. Are you ready?
Always, my lord.
There was laughter then, cold and dreadful, that stopped suddenly, leaving no echoes. Oh, be careful what you say, child of Vaclav. Always is a very long time indeed. Trust me, I know. Send the birds, Vaclav. She did not correct him. When the blood flows again, I will be here, as I promised. But for now, I need to know what is happening. What it is that makes me so restless.
Tazia bowed low. She pulled her cloak around her again as she stepped through the archway, pausing to again rest her hand on her father's skull one more time, and then began the long climb up the spiral stairs. Overview. This long winter has seen not one but 2 grand construction projects conclude in Varushka. Work has been completed on Kostia's Respite, the new port town on the northern shores of the Semilak. Work has also finally finished on the iron roads, and while the blood-red roads are being slowly dismantled by brambles and weeds, the roads of Varushka now link almost every major settlement in the nation. Both projects promise to bring great prosperity to the Varushkan people, and potentially their neighbouring nations as well. Imperial citizens are not the only folk abroad on the new roads, however, and some of those travellers bring news that may unsettle even the most virtuous spirit. Iron Roads. Work on the iron roads began in late 383 YE, and the scope of the ambitious project was expanded to include Ossium in early 384 YE. The last white granite flagstones are laid shortly before the start of the spring equinox, completing a truly remarkable achievement. Varushkan roads uniting 5 territories. The roads already improve the prosperity of Varushkan mine and forest owners, who find it much easier to access labourers, tools and raw materials. The mine owners in each of Mikarova, Karov and Volodmarts will each get a share of 35 random ingots of metal, and forest owners in each of the 3 territories will each get a share of 35 random measures of forest materials, starting after the spring equinox and continuing as long as the roads are open. The benefits are slightly different in Ossium, where there are very few mines. Instead, each forest owner in that territory receives a share of a bounty of 70 forest materials. The Crow roads in Karsk already provide similar benefits, and now all 5 Varushkan territories see a boost to all those who draw their wealth from the hills and the woods. When they were first built, the Crow roads in Karsk were some of the finest in Varushka. In the 5 years since, the situation has changed significantly. Karsk is no longer on the edge of the empire, and the destruction of the sinkhole that was Izemba indicates that the territory is once again tamed, inasmuch as any Varushkan lands can be said to be tame. Unfortunately, this means that the concentration of prosperity in Karsk brought by the Crow roads has declined slightly. Rather than providing 50 ingots to mines and 50 measures to forests, going forward the roads will be the equivalent of the iron roads, providing 35 ingots and measures to each of the mines and forests of Karsk. Iron boots, iron axes. The impact of the roads are particularly felt in Ossium, where their completion has brought both new settlers and new opportunities for Ossium natives to trade with the rest of their nation. The Western Territory is no longer considered underpopulated, and thanks to the new port at Bittershore, the last of the economic problems facing Ossium are now gone. Even with parts of their territory in Thule hands, Varushka can comfortably support 3 armies, and with the prosperity brought to Ossium by the iron roads, they can now support a 4th army. Nobody is quite sure what a 4th army might look like, but there is certainly an appetite for raising one among the people. The Varushkan nation is perhaps in the best position of all the imperial nations to muster a new army. The eternal shafts of time provide a bounty of mithril. The veil of the sunless depths is in Varushkan hands, where some argue it should remain permanently. The Iron Round Tower presents plentiful opportunities to acquire even more precious metal. Varushka is rich. It can certainly raise the money if the will is there. Yet there's also concerns. The jealousy of Wintermark and the Brass Coast still rankles. Varushkan armies are still less effective if forced to take part in a campaign with the Western nations. Elements of the Imperial Synod continue to snipe, openly or subtly, at the proven strategies of the Iron Helms. If Varushka was to raise a 4th army, which of the nation's strengths should it draw on and embody? This is all theoretical at the moment, but some look to the National Assembly for guidance in this matter. Perhaps something like a plighted army, demonstrating the subtle strength of the Ushkan people, just as the Golden Axe show the powerful legacy of the Vard? Perhaps something that seeks to draw on the unique Varushkan understanding of dark and dangerous places? Or perhaps something intended to try and mollify Varushka's critics, something more acceptable to the rest of the Empire? The Assembly can share their guidance with a statement of principle, and if that statement is suitably worded and receives a greater majority, it might spark suggestions for opportunities related to this potential new army. The Honey Offer. While they increase individual prosperity, the roads also provide improved access to the eternal shafts of time, the hunt of Alderai the Fair, the granites of Veltsgorsk, and the Night Quarry, the Veil of the Sunless Depths, the renamed Crawling Depths. The production of each of these bourse resources will now improve by 2 wains each season, as long as the roads remain open. Along with the statement of Lenocha Zabatovna Vipalze, this increase in prosperity has led to more support for the idea that the hunt of Alderai the Fair, and for that matter the Night Quarry, should be in Varushkan hands. The honey offer still stands, the hunt is still controlled by a Varushkan, and Oksana Layava Pinavora and her affiliates are still prepared to contribute 1,000 thrones to the pot if the Senate can be persuaded to return the Weirwood Groves to Varushkan hands. There are other rumblings as well. Ambition, pride, even wisdom perhaps, say that the 2 lost Bourse resources claimed by the Senate during the early years of the Empire should be in Varushkan hands. The inspiration of Ratibor of Temeshwar, combined with comments from a few Urizen pilgrims here to visit the maze of Zoria, brings to mind the fiery threats of the sword scholar Clytemnestra. When the Urizen threatened to destroy the Citadel Guard, people took notice. While there's no desire to see the Varushkan armies disband, a quote sometimes attributed to Ratibor has started doing the rounds. "If you can destroy it, you control it." Nobody is doing anything rash right now, but in theory at least, the Senate might be more inclined to restore the hunt and the quarry to their rightful owners if the alternative was losing them entirely. One to think about, perhaps. King Beneath the Hill. The completion of the iron roads is a great success, but with prosperity comes a need for increased vigilance. Fortunately, there are plenty of mercenary Schlachter and Warden fellowships, as well as Dornish knights-errant in search of glory, prepared to protect those who need it from the worst of the beasts. The problem is that they keep coming. The sovereigns are rising, and as they stir from their slumbers, the other monsters of Varushka seem to gain strength and become more dangerous. There appears to be one exception, however. One sovereign who, on the surface at least, does not seem especially inimical to the people of Varushka, which is enough to make some people very nervous indeed. He has a number of names: the King Beneath the Hill, the Brannock-bound, the Boyar of the Broken Barrow, the Raven, the Lord of Crows, the Battle-fed, but Zoria knew him as the Charnel Lord, and that is the name most often ascribed to him. He has slept beneath the Broken Barrow in the Brannock Hills since before there was an empire, before there was really a Varushka, before the Vard fell from the heavens. During the recent Thule invasion, the Charnel Lord allied first with one side and then the other, finally throwing its support behind the Empire. According to stories, it extracted a promise from the wise ones of Varushka to look after its people, and then slipped back into a deep slumber somewhere beneath the hill. He still sleeps, apparently, but as he slumbers his mind roams the hills and forests of Karsk, and perhaps even further afield. Not long after the winter solstice, a woman in a cloak of black crow feathers, calling herself Tazia of the Black Feathers, has been seen walking the roads of Varushka, apparently with no fear of the increasing number of monsters lurking beneath the trees. Her first port of call is the Vale of the Malinov in Morezva. Hunger. The last time the envoy of the Charnel Lord came to Morezva, they called in ancient agreements between the Sovereign and the Malinov, the Sloiv and the Pravin. They urged them to fund the recreation of the Iron Helms. This time her visit apparently also concerns the Iron Helms, albeit slightly more obliquely. It concerns the disposition of the axe Golod. When Empress Marika disbanded the Iron Helms, the artifact weapon wielded by the commander of the army since time immemorial returned with the last general to Karsk. It has apparently remained there ever since, in the possession of the Malinov family. Tazia, it seems, has urged the current boyar of the Malinov, Svetlana Ironeva Malinov, to return the axe to service. Svetlana has refused point-blank to do so at this time for a number of reasons. According to Svetlana, the axe is a monster and not safe to leave the hidden vault where it is contained. The boyar claims that 1,000 years of slaughter and death has left it infused with a dark spirit, and it hungers to kill. Only the most strong-willed dare lift it, and if their will falters, the axe will urge them to unspeakable acts of murder and conquest. At this stage, the axe may as well be a sovereign itself. The Malinovs are not the custodians of hunger. They are its jailers. They would need to be absolutely certain they were not unleashing a monster on Varushka before they would consider letting hunger out of their sight. Furthermore, the Malinov are extremely concerned about the fact that the current general of the Iron Helms appears to be Alderei the Fair reborn. Alderai is one of the most dangerous figures in the history of Varushka. He conquered Varushka and led armies against the very empire that Varushka is now part of. The undying magicians, the Volodny, supported him, and at his execution, Koshiev the White spoke a prophecy that one day Alderai would return. It's not even as if this is the first Varushkan to claim to be Alderai reborn. The last one apparently destroyed the Jotun meeting stone, further antagonizing the Western Orcs. The Malinov aren't too worried about that, but point out that everyone who's ever made a reasonable claim to be Alderai the Fair reborn has ended up coming to a bad end, as their overconfidence overpowered their wisdom. They would need significant reassurance before they handed over a weapon that urges murderous rampages to someone who claims to be the tyrant boyar that it took the entire empire to defeat. Providing the reassurances the Malinov seek will not be an easy task, but Svetlana has allowed that she is prepared to receive missives from anyone who wishes to persuade her to abandon her vigilance. The Malinov Compromise. Svetlana believes the time is not right for hunger to leave the relative security of its hidden vault. The charnel lord cannot force the Malinov to hand the axe over. There are no more bonds of favour between the family and the sovereign, and she plans to be very careful about ever ending up in his debt again. However, the miners of Merezvar have always supported the Iron Helms. They helped to refound the army, and they accept the arguments that the soldiers of Varushka need to be harder than their many enemies. The Malinov have asked the Varushkan National Assembly to make a well-worded statement of principle that recognises that some weapons are not to be wielded lightly, that the Malinov are right to keep hunger hidden, and that it would be unwise for any Varushkan to seek it out. If this is done, and the statement unequivocally dissuades people from seeking to get the axe released, the Malinov will put their metal and their artisans at the service not only of the Iron Helms, but of all the armies of Varushka. Each year, they will provide the general of the Iron Helms with an iron-bound axe, and the generals of the Golden Axe and the Northern Eagle with a Vorpal axe, and continue to do so as long as hunger remains unused. Wolves, crows, and rats. After she is done in Morezva, Tazia of the Black Feathers visits several priests, Volov, and wise ones across Karsk. She brings a message from the Lord of the Broken Barrow, who offers his assistance to his neighbours. "My master believes that vigilance is one of your virtues," she says. "There are more potential threats to the people of Varushka than the wolves we are familiar with, and perhaps it is time to turn our eyes on them." Tazia is talking about the Thule and the Druge. While the Empire has a map of Verthandi, it has very little information about Skuld or Urdur, and almost nothing about the forest of Olnak. The Charnel Lord offers his aid to gather this information if the priests of Varushka wish to accept it. "Vigilance urges us to despise that which threatens what we watch over. The Empire is at peace with the Thule today, but who knows what tomorrow may bring. The Lord of the Broken Barrow offers his aid to prepare for the future. We send named priest with 50 doses of Liao to urge the people of Varushka to accept their help." Synod Mandate, Varushkan National Assembly. If this mandate is enacted, the Charnel Lord will help the Varushkan people to establish special spy networks in Skuld, Urdur, and the Forest of Ulnak. For the next year, provided the Commission explicitly mentions the Charnel Lord's aim, the Senate or the Imperial Spymaster will be able to create a special spy network supported by the Sovereign of Brannock. The spy network will cost 15 wains of weirwood and 30 crowns, but it will have no upkeep. It will remain in existence for only a single season after it is completed. It automatically decommissions at the end of the season after it is created. Finally, the spy network in Urdur will also provide information about the Thule holdings in the Silver Peaks, Crow's Ridge, and Mikernia, while the spy network in Skuld will also provide information about Krevsati, the Bonewood, and Echofell. The captain of a military unit that wishes to take advantage of this unique spy network will need to come to the Broken Barrow and leave a blood gift for the Charnel Lord. This will grant them the aid of the Sovereign's animal servants, crows, ravens, rats, and wolves, the canine kind. They will also be supported by woods-wise guides chosen from among the people of the Vales of Brannock, both human and independent orcs. With such aid, they will be able to move unseen through the mountains to Otkadov, or through the twisted woods into the Malum. The Charnel Lord is adamant that with his support there is no chance of Hinodir of the Bright Orb or any of the other Thule dragons discovering the scouts in Otkadov, unless someone intentionally exposes their presence. Likewise, as long as nobody does anything foolish, the Druj will be unaware of the presence of spies in their territory. The Sovereign asks for nothing in return, only that the Varushka National Assembly remember that he has offered his aid freely to help protect the borders of his beloved homeland. There is a restriction, however. The spy network will only be able to be used by Varushkans. The Charnel Lord will not or cannot provide his support to the folk of other nations. The zombies are not our friends. During the winter solstice, the Varushkan National Assembly upheld a statement of principle raised by Vaclav Mladenovich Kosti that has caused some confusion in the Vales. What exactly does the Assembly mean when it urges the people to reach out to the sentient creatures who have proven themselves through service and sacrifice with our armies? It seems on the surface to be urging people to try and talk to the monsters of Varushka, to consider their capacity for virtue. The problem is that the majority of the sapient creatures of Varushka are not like the Hulia of Wintermark. They are monsters. Hungry, wicked horrors that seek to feast on living flesh, blood, or tears. Abominable plants that thirst for human and orc blood. Terrifying forces of destruction and despair. That can't be what the Assembly is urging, surely. Dark powers. On the other hand, a couple of years ago the General Assembly specifically sent Father Drakov to reassure the people of Varushka that there was no sin in bargaining with dark powers. The mandate also reminded them that humans are the greatest of all beings in creation, however. Most people do not make bargains with the dark powers of Varushka because they like them, or want them as neighbours. They do it because they feel they need to for whatever reason, and because they think the alternatives are worse. Their rule is hard, but the real monsters lie outside their walls, is a lesson Varushkan children learn very quickly. But people do make deals with sovereigns. They, at least, can be bargained with. The Varushkans and their forebears have always made deals with the dark powers of Varushka. Is the Assembly urging them to do that now? To see the rise of the sovereigns that seems to be taking place not as a dreadful threat, but as an opportunity? Humans are the greatest of all beings in creation, and more than a match for inhuman entities. We send named priest with 75 doses of Liao to remind every Varushkan that it is not against the doctrines of the faith to bargain with sovereigns, and that the virtuous can certainly put their dark boons to virtuous use. Synod Mandate, Varushkan National Assembly. If this mandate is enacted, those in a position to do so will hunt out the dark powers of Varushka and seek to make bargains with them. Most will see this as encouragement to try and get boons from sovereigns, while those able to do so might seek out Eternals of a more sinister nature, those of the Winter Realm in particular. Some of the bargains they make will certainly be ill-advised, and may create terrible problems that will need to be addressed. Others, however, will present opportunities that may be taken advantage of. At the summer solstice there will be at least one opportunity to gain an advantage by dealing with sovereigns or Eternals. The other people. There are some other obvious examples of sapient creatures who live in Varushka, some of whom have self-evident capacity of virtue. Orcs. The Thule who control Mykernia, Krevsati, Bonewood and the Webwood are not the only orcs in Varushka. There are former Druj subjects in Ossium, such as the small sept that lives in Orieb, or the one that helps tend the bone hives, or the sept of the Menrathat in Nierwald. There are also small enclaves of independent orcs in the wild places. While many of them are little better than bandits, There are a few, such as those who live in Brannock under the aegis of the Charnel Lord, who live quiet lives of hunting and agriculture and actively avoid their human neighbours. Outside of Ossium, many Varushkans are cautious about having too much to do with these orcs, but the National Assembly could encourage them to seek contact with them and make bargains. Varushka is very large, and we must acknowledge that we share it with fellow sapient beings, the orcs. We send named priest with 50 doses of Liao to urge any Varushkan who can do so to make peaceful contact with the orcs who share our hills and forests, consider their virtue, and discover what deals might be made with them. Synod Mandate, Varushkan National Assembly. If this mandate is enacted, Varushkan traders, merchants and Volov will seek to make peaceful contact with any receptive orcs in Varushka, including the Thule, and make deals with them. The kinds of deals they would make would likely be much more mundane in nature than those available from the Sovereigns and Eternals. These are fellow mortals, after all. During the summer solstice, there will be at least one opportunity to take advantage of a deal or bargain with one or more of these groups of orcs, and may even improve Varushkan understanding of the scattered groups of non-humans they share their nation with. Plenty of Varushkans. The two mandates are not in competition. The first mandate will mostly influence those with experience dealing with dark powers, Kabbalists and Volov in particular, and those who are ambitious or desperate enough to need the kinds of magical boons Sovereigns and Eternals can provide. The second mandate, by contrast, is more likely to encourage traders, merchants, wise ones, and even boyars to look for opportunities to profit by dealing with their foreign but ultimately mortal neighbours. The Iron Helms. When the statement becomes common knowledge, some of the soldiers of the Iron Helms in particular are concerned that there has been a serious misconception. There are no wolves in the traditional Varushkan sense in the Iron Helms. The only time monsters fight alongside the army is when they are raised by winter magic. While the people from the Vales of Brannock may be more than a little odd, and while some of them may use magic that is not common knowledge, they are as human as anyone else. There may be stories of hound handlers who wear the skins of animals, but those who do so are doing it to deepen the bond with their dogs. They don't actually transform into beasts. The birds that follow the army owe fealty to the Kabbalists who use their ritual magic and lore to support their fellow soldiers, and if a few of them also look to creatures like the Charnel Lord for guidance, that is no reason to think that the Husks or Dubik, the murderous Mora or the rapacious Rusalka will ever show even the slightest hint of virtue. No actual monster would serve in a Varushkan army anyway, and no sane soldier would serve alongside them. Such beasts could never be trusted not to run amok when the bloodlust took it. Whatever benefits they may provide are simply not worth the cost. To become a monster is to fall forever, as some wise ones put it. When you choose between two evils, anyone who suggests picking the greater evil is your enemy.